The night she was forced out of her home, it didn't feel real at first. It felt like one of those arguments that would eventually calm down, where someone would call her name back and tell her to return inside. But that moment never came. Instead, the door closed behind her with a finality that echoed louder than any words spoken before it. She stood there on the narrow street, holding a small, worn-out bag that barely contained her life, her hands trembling as she tried to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. She was only 18. Barely an adult, still learning what the world meant, still believing that family was supposed to be the safest place on earth. But safety had disappeared in a single evening. The people who were supposed to protect her had chosen distance instead, leaving her with accusations she couldn't fully process and silence that hurt more than shouting ever could. As she walked away from the house, every step felt heavier than the last. The streetlights flickered above her as if they were uncertain whether to guide her or leave her in darkness. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. Her chest felt tight, her throat dry, and her mind flooded with questions that had no answers. Why had it come to this? What had she done to deserve being cast out? The city around her was alive, but none of it felt welcoming. People passed by without noticing her pain, each lost in their own lives. She found herself moving between cheap shelters, spending nights in crowded rooms filled with strangers, where sleep came in fragments and comfort didn't exist. During the day, she took whatever work she could find, cleaning, serving, anything that would give her enough money to survive another night. But even then, rejection followed her everywhere. Doors closed, opportunities slipped away, and hope began to feel like something meant for other people. Slowly, exhaustion replaced fear. The kind of exhaustion that settles deep inside the bones, where even crying feels like too much effort. Sitting alone one night, she finally understood something painful and irreversible: no one was coming to save her. The days that followed blurred into a routine of survival rather than living. She woke up early, often before sunrise, not because she had somewhere important to go, but because she needed to find work before the limited opportunities were gone. Her body grew used to exhaustion, her stomach used to emptiness, and her mind learned to silence questions that had no comforting answers. She tried everything she could find: washing dishes in small roadside cafes, cleaning office floors after hours, handing out flyers under the burning sun, even sorting goods in noisy, crowded warehouses. Each job promised a little hope at first, but it rarely lasted. Employers looked at her young face and doubted her strength, questioned her experience, or simply replaced her with someone older, more reliable. Rejection became routine, as common as breathing. Yet, even in that harsh rhythm, something inside her refused to disappear completely. There were moments, small, fragile moments, where determination flickered back to life. Like when she managed to earn just enough for a hot meal after 2 days of hunger, or when she found a quiet corner in a shelter and told herself she would not let this life define her. Pain was constant, but surrender was not. Some nights, she would sit alone outside under dim streetlights, watching the city move without her. People rushed by with purpose, laughter, conversations, destinations. She had none of those things anymore. Still, she clenched her fists and reminded herself that surviving another day meant she was still in the fight, even if she didn't know what she was fighting for yet. Then, on one ordinary afternoon while working a temporary cleaning shift in a rundown building, she overheard 2 workers talking about something unusual. A small, almost forgotten print shop was being sold for an unbelievably low price, so low that most people laughed at the idea of it being worth anything at all. But something about those words stayed with her long after the conversation ended, quietly planting the first seed of a possibility she didn't yet understand. The idea first reached her like a rumor she wasn't supposed to take seriously. A cheap print shop, almost abandoned, sitting at the edge of an old market street where businesses went to die. People talked about it with amusement, as if it were a joke rather than an opportunity. "It's worthless," one man said while passing her. "Old machines, broken equipment, even the roof leaks. They're practically giving it away." Another laughed and called it a place where dreams went to rot. But something about those words stayed with her longer than they should have. In a life where everything had been taken from her, the idea of something unwanted, something overlooked, felt strangely familiar. She went to see it the next day, walking through narrow streets until she found the building. It looked tired, forgotten by time itself. The sign was faded, the windows dusty, and the metal shutters hung slightly crooked as if even they had given up. Standing outside it, she hesitated. Logic told her to walk away. She had nothing left to lose, but also nothing left to risk. And yet, a quiet pull inside her refused to let her leave. It wasn't hope exactly, it was more like recognition. Like the place understood what it meant to be abandoned. The money she had saved was barely enough for survival, let alone ownership of anything. Every coin she had was earned through sleepless nights and exhausting work, meant for food and shelter. But that day, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She didn't know why she trusted it, only that she did. The transaction was quick, almost careless on the seller's side, as if they were happy to be rid of it. When the papers were signed, she stood there for a moment, holding ownership of something no one else wanted. Later that evening, she pushed open the heavy door for the first time. It creaked loudly, echoing into the darkness inside. Dust rose into the air, catching the faint light that slipped through broken windows. She stepped forward slowly, unaware that within this forgotten space, something far greater than she could imagine was waiting to be discovered. The moment she stepped fully inside, the smell of dust and old ink filled her lungs. The shop looked as though it had been forgotten not just by people, but by time itself. Thick layers of dust covered every surface, turning once functional machines into dull, gray shapes. Large printing presses stood silent in the corners like abandoned giants, their metal frames rusted and lifeless. Broken tools lay scattered across wooden tables, and stacks of yellowed paper leaned dangerously against shelves, as if they might collapse with the slightest touch. For a few seconds, she simply stood there, taking it all in. It felt less like a business and more like a graveyard of forgotten work. Anyone else would have turned around and left immediately. It looked useless, completely beyond saving. But she didn't leave. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and began to clean. At first, her movements were slow and uncertain, as if she wasn't fully convinced this place deserved her effort. She wiped down surfaces, pushed aside broken materials, and carefully sorted through piles of discarded papers. The work was exhausting, but strangely grounding. With each small action, the chaos around her began to feel slightly more manageable. As the hours passed, something shifted inside her. Fear slowly faded, replaced by curiosity. She started noticing details she had missed before: the quality of the machines beneath the dust, the structure of the room, the way everything had once been carefully placed before it was abandoned. It wasn't completely dead. It was just neglected. While moving an old cabinet near the back wall, her hand brushed against something unusual. A drawer built into the structure caught her attention, not because it was visible, but because it wasn't. It was hidden slightly behind a panel, as if it had been deliberately concealed. Unlike everything else in the shop, this part felt intentional. She paused, her heartbeat quickening slightly. Slowly, she reached for it, realizing that whatever this hidden drawer contained, it hadn't been left there by accident. It took her a moment just to figure out how to pull it open. The drawer didn't move easily, as if it had been stuck for years or deliberately secured to stay shut. She placed both hands on it and pulled harder, her arms straining as the wood resisted with a stubborn groan. Dust fell in small clouds around her fingers, making her cough as she refused to let go. After a few more attempts, something finally gave way with a sharp click. The drawer slid open slowly, revealing darkness inside, an emptiness that quickly transformed into something far more unsettling. She leaned closer, brushing away layers of dust to see what was hidden inside. At first glance, it looked like nothing special: old papers, faded ink, and stacked documents tied together with worn strings. But as she carefully lifted the first bundle, she realized these were not ordinary scraps or forgotten records. The paper quality was different, thicker, more expensive than anything this rundown shop should have ever used. Her eyes scanned the first few pages. There were typed documents mixed with handwritten notes, some of them filled with strange markings, coded symbols, and underlined phrases that didn't immediately make sense. Names appeared repeatedly, some crossed out, others emphasized as if they held importance. It felt less like random storage and more like something carefully organized, something meant to be hidden. A strange uneasiness settled in her chest. She picked up another file, then another. Each one added more confusion instead of clarity. Contracts, delivery logs, coded messages, and references to transactions she couldn't understand. This wasn't related to printing work, not in any normal sense. The more she read, the more it became clear that this shop had once been involved in something far bigger than its appearance suggested. Someone had used it as a cover, a hiding place for information that was never meant to be found. She looked around the dusty room again, but now it felt different. The emptiness no longer seemed harmless, it felt intentional, like the shop had been abandoned on purpose. Her fingers tightened around the papers as a new thought formed in her mind. Whatever this was, it wasn't just forgotten history. It was something buried for a reason. And by opening this drawer, she might have just stepped into something far more dangerous, and life-changing, than she ever imagined. At first, she told herself it had to be a misunderstanding. The papers looked confusing, scattered between formal documents and handwritten notes filled with strange codes and abbreviations. But the more she sat with them, the more patterns began to appear. Names repeated in different contexts. Dates that didn't match public records. References to deliveries that had nothing to do with printing materials. Slowly, painfully, she started connecting fragments that were never meant to be connected. Hours passed without her noticing. The dusty shop around her faded into the background as her focus deepened. She compared pages, underlined similar phrases, and tried to make sense of coded sequences written in margins. It wasn't random. Nothing about it was random. Whoever had worked here had been careful, too careful. What emerged from the chaos was a disturbing possibility. This print shop had not simply failed or been abandoned like the others in the area. It had been shut down intentionally. Used. Then discarded. Hidden in plain sight. A place where sensitive information had been printed, duplicated, and passed along without drawing attention. Her stomach tightened as the realization settled in. This wasn't just business paperwork. It pointed toward powerful individuals, organizations that didn't appear publicly, and transactions that could not be explained through legal means. Whatever had happened here involved people with influence, people who would not want their past exposed. She leaned back slightly, the papers trembling in her hands. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier. Every shadow in the corners seemed sharper, every sound outside more noticeable. The shop no longer felt abandoned, it felt watched. And then the final realization hit her fully, sinking deeper than anything before it. She wasn't just holding old documents. She was holding something that someone had clearly tried to bury forever. Something that, if exposed, could bring consequences she couldn't yet comprehend. For the first time since discovering the drawer, she understood the truth clearly enough to feel fear rise inside her chest. She was no longer safe in ignorance. It started with small things she almost convinced herself were coincidences. A man standing too long across the street, not entering any of the nearby shops. A car that passed slowly more than once in the same hour. A shadow near the corner of the building that disappeared whenever she tried to look directly at it. At first, she told herself she was imagining it, her mind reacting to the stress of what she had found. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger. Every time she stepped outside the print shop, she felt eyes on her. Even inside, she found herself glancing toward the windows more often than necessary, expecting to see someone watching her. The once empty street no longer felt empty. It felt measured, observed, as if someone had quietly started paying attention to her routine. Then came the warnings. They were subtle at first. A folded piece of paper slipped under the door without explanation, containing only a few words that made no sense to her but carried an unsettling tone. A short message left near the entrance: leave it alone. No name. No signature. Just enough to make her stomach tighten. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it could be a prank or a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew it wasn't random. Someone knew she had found something inside that drawer. Still, fear did not make her stop. If anything, it hardened her resolve. After everything she had already lost in life, she refused to let this opportunity slip away or be taken from her without understanding what it truly was. She locked the shop earlier than usual that night, her hands slightly unsteady as she secured the door. The street outside was unusually quiet, almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath. As she turned back inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had already shifted into something irreversible. Whatever she had uncovered, it was no longer just a secret. It was something that had noticed her back. Running away would have been easier. Safer. But something inside her refused to let her abandon what she had found. Instead of surrendering to fear, she began returning to the documents again and again, studying them with a focus she had never known before. What once felt like chaos slowly started forming structure in her mind. Patterns became clearer. Names began to connect. And the more she understood, the more control she felt gaining over something that had once terrified her. She also began learning the shop itself. The machines were old, but not useless. With patience, she studied how they worked, asking questions, watching videos in cheap internet cafes, and slowly teaching herself the basics of printing and production. What once looked like a broken, forgotten space began to feel alive again under her hands. She cleaned deeper, repaired small parts, and organized everything with careful precision. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation became visible. The dusty shop no longer looked abandoned. It began to show signs of structure, order, and purpose. What people once laughed at as a worthless place now had someone breathing life back into it. But the biggest change was not the shop, it was her. The fear that once controlled her slowly began to lose its grip. In its place, something stronger grew. Confidence, built not from comfort but from survival. She learned to make decisions without hesitation, to trust her instincts, to stand firm even when uncertainty surrounded her. Every small victory added to her strength. Every solved problem reminded her she was not powerless anymore. Even the threatening presence outside, the unknown watchers, began to feel less overwhelming. She was still cautious, but no longer frozen by fear. Instead, she moved with awareness, with purpose. One evening, as she locked the shop after another long day of work, she paused for a moment, looking back at what she had built from almost nothing. And in that silence, she finally understood something deeply and clearly: she was no longer the helpless girl who had been thrown out at 18. The final pieces came together on an ordinary night, when she least expected it. While reviewing the oldest files one more time, she noticed a final hidden layer she had previously missed, one document carefully sealed behind another, almost invisible unless handled in a certain way. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, realizing this was not just another record. It was the missing link. The truth was no longer fragmented. It was complete. The print shop had been part of a much larger operation tied to powerful individuals and hidden financial movements, information that had been quietly suppressed for years. And somehow, by sheer chance or fate, she had become the sole holder of evidence that could change everything. Her breath slowed as understanding settled in. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth, justice, and a path she never imagined walking. Everything she had endured, being thrown out, suffering alone, struggling to survive, had led her here, to this exact moment. For a long time, she simply sat in silence, the weight of it all pressing gently but firmly on her shoulders. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Something stronger had replaced it: clarity. Purpose. She looked around the transformed shop, now filled with signs of her hard work, her resilience, her growth. And for the first time, she didn't see loss. She saw direction. In a quiet whisper to herself, she understood the truth of her journey. She hadn't been abandoned by life. She had been led through it. She didn't just survive, she was rebuilt.